Welcome to the Bottom Line Podcast with Nicholas Kuzmich, where we discuss what matters most, the bottom line, featuring the top minds in their industry. Now, let's get started.
Hey everybody, Nicholas Kuzmich here, host of the Bottom Line Podcast, where I connect with industry leaders and sometimes industry sleepers to discuss what matters most, and that is the bottom line. Of course, when I talk about the bottom line, yes, profits are important, and yes, foundational to many people's businesses, but also just what matters most to the individual that I'm talking to. So past guests have included people like Paulus Telfer, founder of Sensei, Sean Clark, CEO and co-founder of High Level, and so many more, all of which you can listen to however you listen to podcasts. And this episode, like all of them, are brought to you by H2H Media Group, company I founded where we help high-ticket businesses get more qualified leads without funnels. Over the last 2 decades, we've generated close to $1 billion in collective sales, meaning for us, our clients, and their clients along the way. If that's of interest to you, go to nicholaskuzmich.com. Jayson, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
I appreciate you having me on. I was listening to your podcast earlier this morning, and leaders and sleepers was actually a note I made because I was like, man, that is a great little punchline. And that I pride myself on like identifying those sleepers and being a talent scout. So I just love that one line. And also, I'll just throw in there, I've known you for well over a decade now. You are my go-to guy when it comes to digital advertising. As you know, I reach out to you every once in a while. I'm like, hey, would you entertain taking on a client like this? Because like you're the only person I trust in that space, and I know a lot of people in that space. So just want to cut a +1 your intro there.
I appreciate that. Actually, the reason why I thought of this, like leaders and sleepers, or leaders are great. Everyone knows them, obviously, and they do good work. But there was a long time ago, probably like 8 years ago, I was having a conversation with someone who wanted to be a client of ours on the agency side of things. And they sold these like hand woven, I wish I remember the name, like plush dolls or whatever. But the play was they would hire, I forgot the country, but they would hire help. And there's this whole like give back, triple bottom line kind of idea. And we were talking about ads, and he'd grown this company. And I'm like, okay, so like, how you doing on ads? He goes, yeah, we spend about $1 million or $1.5 million a month on Facebook ads right now. We're just looking to scale. I'm like, cool. So like, who runs them for you right now? And he goes, oh, me. Like you, like the founder, you don't have an agency? He goes, no, like I figured this is my business. I needed to figure out how to do it. And so I do it. And then I just realized that like this one individual could probably teach more about ads than every guru out there that claims to know a bunch about ads. And then I thought there's tons of people just like that nobody knows about. And, you know, secretly, now that I'm thinking about it, you know, we're talking offline. What's the reason for the podcast? I'm not into the social media game. I'm not into being an influencer. I'm not looking to like build a huge audience that way. But one thing that does like hurt my heart a little bit is when I come across some amazing, great people, I wish with the push of a button, I could put out a post and be like, draw all eyes to them and say, hey, look at this individual because they're freaking amazing. And right now I can't. All right. A few thousand people will see this and whatever. So there is some weird secret underlying hope that if anything, like I can use my marketing skills to draw media to great conversations with people that people may never know about. So I don't know how we got off on that tangent, but
no, I think it's a tangent worth kind of exploring. I mean, I'm very similar, as our friend Dan Martell says, everything you want is on the other side of reach and reputation. And reputation and the work that we do is pretty good. My reach isn't so great. And I've really explored that of like, do I want to cross that chasm? Because I don't necessarily, there's drawbacks of being quote unquote a celebrity in different environments and that kind of stuff. However, what you just shared is exactly what I've thought about as well. Is I come across so many fascinating people, and I see their greatness in them. And if I can fast track them in any way, and if I had the reach, that's how I could do it. And it's almost like the Joe Rogan effect. And the amount of people he's pushing into the spotlight, like Jordan Peterson or David Goggins and that kind of stuff. So you and I are similar in that sense.
Yeah. We'll figure it out. Maybe we'll have that as part of the conversation. But before we go there, what I
Sure.
forgot to do is introduce you. And if you've listened to the podcast or watched it before, I don't like reading biographies because they're just kind of canned or whatever. I like to put the hard work back on you, the guest. And what I mean by that is if, in your own words. And I know this is actually not an easy question for an entrepreneur to answer, which is actually part of the fun part of the conversation. But if you were to answer in your own words, like who are you, what do you do, and a little bit about your company. And I always encourage you to go as deep or as shallow as you'd like, just because I know it's going to spawn a bunch of great questions, further questions for our conversation here. But hey, if it was an elevator or you're at a networking event or something like that, and someone's like, "Hey man, who are you? What do you do? And tell me a little bit about your company," how would you answer that about yourself?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's obviously it's context dependent.
Yes,
And
of
I
course.
think I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, and that's taken different forms. And I think earlier in my journey, I really held on to that like label and identity. But a couple of years ago, I made a post on social media and it resonated with a handful of folks that I identify more as an artist.
Right.
And to me, business is simply my canvas. So
Love that.
I am an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years. What has been occupying the majority of my energy and my heart and my soul for the last 11 years is an invite-only community that I run called MMT. And it's just a beautiful collection of folks that we bring together kind of once a year for 3.5 days of learning and connecting and just really being amongst companions on the path. So that's what I do, quote unquote, professionally. But I've also set up that business in a way that I have a bit of an off season to explore other interests.
Yeah.
So I have a 57-acre farm. That's been my life for the last 3-4 years. I love to cook. So we've started to host dinners on our farm, harvest dinners, which we did for the first time this year. And we just absolutely loved it. I'm in the process of writing a book. So all that to say, yeah, as I've grown older and a little more mature, I have a harder time introducing myself.
Nice. Actually, I like that because most people just give the canned answer of like the Brendan Burchard, I help blank do blank.
Yeah.
But that's super real. And knowing what I know of you, it's funny. I had the same thought of I'm not an entrepreneur. I define entrepreneurs as people who are doing like great things for great people, the Elon Musks of the world, and build real companies. I have a lifestyle business, if you want to call it that. But I also have a hard time identifying as an artist. So I'm still looking for that word that I feel like, yes, I'm not an entrepreneur. You know, the closest I could come to it, if you look at like my gene keys and my human design and my life up until this point, is some variation of educator, teacher kind of thing, which encapsulates some of the artist element of it. But I do love the reframe because I, like you, yeah, I don't know if you could call me an entrepreneur, unless an entrepreneur is simply defined as someone who, you know, tries to put value out in the world in exchange for dollars. But I'm wrestling with artist or teacher or some other cool word that might make more sense to me.
Well, I mean, that's what I referenced in the post. Like the word artist is something I always felt reserved to like somebody who does paintings or sculptures or those kind of things. But I've had 4 years to sit with it and to kind of try it on. And the truth of the matter is, I find art and creativity in everything I do. So when it comes to like designing a live experience and the work that we do in MMT, like that to me is a blank slate. And I look at it like a blank slate and like art. Or if I'm crafting, I'm writing, the writing process is very, you know, creative and artful in its own way. Even farming to some degree. When we plant flowers and that kind of stuff, they're art, they're beautiful. Trimming trees. So yeah, I've been able to embrace it a little more, but very similarly, I had a hesitation, one could say, early on.
I do like that frame. I can sit with that a little bit and let it settle into my soul. So here's the funny thing. I generally like to start these podcasts on a certain level with a question from a conversation deck from my friend Jayson Gaignard. But, you know, because again, you know, you sent me the deck. I love the deck. And I've always been a fan of how you have the ability to ask great questions, because great questions lead to great conversations and great relationships. And so I always have this deck and I randomly ask the guests if it's okay if I can pick a card and read the card to them and have them answer it. So it's been a great way to do the podcast. I didn't bring the deck with me. I'm currently in Hawaii here for just over a month. Over the winter season, but I do have some questions. But I figured there's one question that you like to ask often, that up until probably A month ago, I hated when you asked this question. And maybe we can get into why. But I hated this question. And then a month ago, when I was thinking about it, I'm like, for the first time, and as long as I can remember, I can't answer this question and do it with a smile on my face. But I'm going to turn around and ask it to you if you're okay with it. Not that you've never been asked it. You've probably been asked it a million times. And I know you've asked it a million times. But let's do the celebration champagne question of
Sure.
if we were celebrating a year from now with a bottle of champagne, what would we be celebrating? And why don't we even throw in why?
Yeah, so it's funny. I am a collector of great questions,
Yeah.
and anytime I have a question thrown back at me, I'm always caught off guard. So this question, not necessarily. I'm just trying to sit with what is very kind of true for me at the moment. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I'm entering a new season of my life, to some degree, and that is, I was actually talking to my daughter about it yesterday. There's a quote which I love, which is, many people spend their whole lives never hearing their own voice.
Wow.
So I find myself at this stage of my life really wanting to metabolize a lot of learnings that I've learned the hard way to
Right.
support other people on their journey. And that can take various forms. It could take, you know, whether it be social media posts, whether it be writing a book, and those kind of things. So that for me is just the big focus. I don't have necessarily a big monumental, like this
Yeah.
needs to happen per se, because I was joking with my wife about it yesterday. Last year, December 29th, I committed to do, I thought I would have a book draft done in 90 days. And I'm
Right.
still like, I'm 3/4 of the way through that draft, but I hope this thing is, you know, getting close to publication if we're meeting a year from today, because it's been a tremendous amount of effort. It's been a beautiful process, and therapeutic, and just has given me a
Sure.
much deeper understanding of relationships and myself. But yeah, if I had to pinpoint one thing specifically, it would be the book is out of my hands as far as like it's going off to print with the publisher.
Yeah, let's speak about that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if you walk into a room and you ask the audience, and it's an entrepreneurial audience, how many
Yeah.
people in here have written a book? I think the number of hands or the percentage of people who put up their hands is getting higher every day, right? There's
Yeah,
30,
sure,
40,
sure.
50, 70% or whatever. But if you can follow up that with, well, how many people who haven't written a book would like to write a book? It's almost 100% every time in that room.
Yeah.
Um, you have been in the lives of and spoken with many great authors. The James Clears of the world has come through MMT. A good friend of yours, the Ryan Holidays of the world. I mean, we could go at Tim Ferriss. Oh, we podcast not long enough to list them all. And I know more than just being in great relationships, you're a great learner from these experiences. You've even recently had the person who's behind some of these big book launches, you know, speaking
Yeah.
to the community. Why is the book taking so long? What's going on? Like, what is a process that someone doesn't know about writing a book that they should know, whether they've jumped into that endeavor or are looking to jump into the endeavor? Because I think with so many people out there and all these organizations like, hey, we'll show you how to write a book in 90 days and get it out there and so on and so forth. To you, it does, at least from the outside perspective, seem like art, like a real life project that you thought would take 90 days. It's now a year later and you're almost there. But what do you have to share to the individual who says, I want to put out my voice there, whether it be a book or not, but let's just, because we're on the book topic, start there and see where you go.
Yeah, I mean, really, um, I think why I'm putting so much emphasis into this is so MMT is an invite only event for entrepreneurs. We do it historically annually. Post pandemic, we were doing 2 a year. And I realized I wasn't creating enough space in between events for me to pursue, again, other interests and those kind of things. And when we had our 10th year anniversary gathering, we kind of dropped a bit of a bomb on everybody and said, hey, we're actually not doing an event next year, which all of our revenue is tied to doing an event.
Right.
So
Right.
it chose to be, or it proved to be, you know, rather problematic from a business perspective. However, a North Star question for me, I've thought about my mortality since I was pretty consistently since I was 18. And that has served as just a fantastic way to kind of cut through the noise and help me make, decisions and those kind of things. And one of the questions I've really been sitting with is this notion of, is today a good day to die?
I love
And
that. Jeez.
if I really am honest with that question, to me, and my goal in life is I can get to a place where I feel like, yes, like today is a good day to die. I got out everything I need to get out, and I've made the impact I need to make. And the truth of the matter is, like, I've done enough in the context of business. I feel like I am enough, which is like, it's been a hell of a journey to kind of get here. I have a beautiful relationship with my wife, a beautiful relationship with my daughter. Like, I feel like I've checked all those boxes. However, the one thing I can't comfortably come to terms with is if I found myself on my deathbed, that I haven't taken the time to metabolize those learnings over the last decade to support others on their journey, because I know it can support and it has supported those who I talk to in conversation or on podcasts or those kind of things. So like, that is like the deep why. So because of that, I can't go to one of those services and use AI, ChatGPT, to craft my book. There is an element of like, I need to do it justice. I need to do it, quote unquote, the hard way, one could say. And I actually wrote a book in 2014 called Mastermind Dinners. It was designed to be like this fun little quick book. Took me 3 weeks to make. And it actually did better than I originally anticipated. It's probably sold 50,000 copies. To date, it has like 700-800 reviews on Amazon. And I share that because I'm actually not proud of that book. When I go to speak at a conference or what have you, and the conference organizer has like a bunch of copies of my book there, I cringe because I was like, I didn't put my all into it. So in the context of like this book specifically, I want to put, only I will know if I'm like proud of the product. And there's also, you have to be conscious of like being a perfectionist and all that kind of stuff. There is that balance. But I also know that like I've worked hard enough in certain sections of the book that I am proud and I can kind of let go. So the whole process is, it's taken me longer than anticipated, but then knowing authors, to what you said, I mean, Ryan Holiday's an anomaly. He's written 14 best-selling books in the span of 10 years. Like the guy's just a monster when it comes to publishing and producing. But like James Clear took 4 years to write his book. Cal Newport takes 3-4 years to write his book. So I think I was just, from a timeline perspective, I've been around so many folks who've leveraged those services that like churn out books really quickly, whether you transcribe it or use a chat GPT, that I thought within 90, and also I know the topic well because it's been my life for the last decade. I thought I'd be able to churn this out in 90 days, and that wasn't true. So that's kind of my experience of why I've taken the long road. But again, like it's been a beautiful process as a result. And I would not have been able to unearth just so much stuff if I, again, took the easy way.
Yeah, it's kind of refreshing to hear that, especially in today's day and age where everything is about cutting corners, not in the bad way per se, but what's the fastest, easiest, minimum viable product you can get out there? Can you chat GPT, whether it's a book or not, right? It's like always just deliver first and then fix the crap later. And I think we're leaning away maybe a little bit from putting out work that we're proud of. This is, I mean, you speak to the book, but you've already alluded to how, on your 10-year anniversary of MMT, and we're going to talk about MMT in just a sec, but on 10-year anniversary in MMT, you're like, well, we're not going to have an event this next year. And that, as you've done in the past, have made decisions that weren't the most best for the bottom line profits, but they were true to you. They were decisions that like followed your North Star. Is that, and when I say the word strategy, not from a tactical standpoint, like, oh, I just do that because but has that always been you, or was that learned and developed over time? And the reason I only bring that up is because, again, I think in a space now where so many people are just used to the fast way out, that the North Star has kind of disappeared a little bit. And it's now just churn whatever you can, however you can, in the easiest way you can, profit first and everything else second. Like where did that come from for you? And how have you been able to make decisions, difficult decisions, when it was about community first or vision first or North Star first or your heart first, even if it meant that could be temporary suffering for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's an interesting thing to explore because I haven't always been like this.
Okay.
I think I just learned those lessons early on. Like I often share, I had an e-commerce business, which was like my thing that was successful, one could say, and really kind of anchored me into like being an entrepreneur. But I often share like I built a business I hated to enable me to buy things I didn't need to impress people I didn't like. And I had all these like goals that were, when I achieved them, I realized they were pretty hollow. And I
Right.
mean, at the age of 23, I had kidney complications as a result of stress. So I
Mm,
realized that like money and happiness scale very differently. And that kind of shook me to my core. And it's easy for some. It's not judgment of like putting on blinders and like even though things don't feel right, like keep
there you
plowing
go.
forward.
Right.
For me, I just I guess I don't say introspective by nature. I've benefited greatly from a lot of personal development over the last kind of 20 years and just curious, one could say. And I'm always trying to get to the core of things. And I mean, I think I also have an example in my parents specifically
Yeah.
where my father has sacrificed his physical health and all that kind of stuff for work for the last 80 years, and now there's no time left to do things he's always wanted to kind of do, and those kind of things. So I think it's a plethora of things
Sure.
that have led me to be like that. But yeah, I just again, the mortality thing has been huge for me. I mean, when I was 18, I was a mechanic.
Mm,
And one day at lunch, I had a probably an early version of the iPhone or what have you. And I was fiddling with my phone waiting for my food. And I was like, oh, I wonder what the average like lifespan is for a male. And back then it was 79 years. And I was like, oh, I wonder what that is in the perspective of days. And it's
yeah.
27,920 days, I think it is. And being 18 at the time, I looked that up and I had lived 6,400 out of those 27,000 days. And for the first time in my life, it created a sense of urgency that like I could see the days ticking because it's easy to be like,
Oh,
oh, being
yeah.
80 so far from
Someday.
now, what have you, but like you're literally seeing the days tick. And for me, that sense of urgency has helped me again make those hard decisions. And the context of like again just fast forwarding to my deathbed, like what will people say about me, about my relationships? Will my wife be there, or will we be divorced, or those kind of things? So just fast forwarding to that moment to me just really helps me again make those hard decisions and keep the main thing the main thing.
I love that. The perspective. I think there was a company still out, I believe. I think they're called 1,000 Days or something like that. I don't know if you've seen the app or the big plaster thing you put
Yeah,
on
yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah,
blacks
yeah,
out the number of days you've already lived. And then you
yeah.
just, I mean, it's fascinating how quick we can lose perspective. And then, talking about day counts, our friend Jim Shields talks about 18 summers with our kids.
Sure,
You're like,
sure, sure.
Jesus, 18, that's it. Like that. Um, or 84 seasons. I
Yeah,
heard someone
yeah,
say we live 84 seasons, essentially 84 summers, 84 winters. And like when you
yeah,
see it
yeah.
in that perspective, you're like, oh, gee, that's not long. Like we
And that's if you're lucky,
right,
right?
right,
We're of age. We're starting to see friends pass
right,
unexpectedly.
right, right, right.
And that is wild, right? So nothing is obviously kind of guaranteed. And again, that allows me to make some of those what some would deem as like hard decisions.
I know this is coming a little bit late in our conversation, but one of the reasons I'm excited to have this conversation is because you have been directly involved, maybe responsible, too heavy of a word. So let's just say involved, but indirectly or directly involved in the city I currently live in. And I'm a big believer in where you live being a huge people talk about, who your five friends are and all that stuff. I think there's some truth to that. For the longest time, my five closest friends didn't actually have all that. I think there's loose ties and tight ties and whatever, weak ties. We can talk about that another time. But where you live and the proximity of you have with certain people is huge. So where I live, um, who some of my best friends are, um when shit hits the fan and like when I was asked by my estate lawyer to write who will look after my kids if we die in a plane crash, like Farron and I and the kids are still around, who the names on that list is, who I've had on this podcast, hell, even the advent of my business, from a time where I reached out to you and said, hey, if you're willing to drive to Waterloo, I'm willing to have lunch with you. And that led to conversations that led to this. And we can go down that whole rabbit hole if we want, and the story of that. But you've been, again, directly or indirectly involved / responsible for some of the most monumental things that are currently going in my life, minus the meeting of and the marrying of my wife. Other than that, I think there's a lot of other things that you've been around. Yeah, you missed one. You got to go back. And it's a testament. I mean, I had Brad Pedersen on the podcast, and he continued to say, it's because of Jayson that I'm where I'm at. I'm my business partner, and Pila Lomi and what they're doing, and the people that make up some of our core crew in Kelowna, and so on and so forth. I say all that to say, like, from the very beginning, I don't know if you envisioned this or visioned this or whatever, but there was clearly a recognition more than most people had on the importance of relationships. I think that's where the advent of MMT maybe began. I don't know. Maybe we can talk about how you actually came across. I know everyone's heard the story of Tim Ferriss and going there, so you can listen to I don't want to go over anything people can listen to somewhere else. But how did or where does the realization of where did that come from? And just if you can give people a 30,000-foot view on the importance you put on that and the role that plays and what you do and the decisions you make and how you design your business and all that fun stuff, I think that would be a good backdrop as a starting point.
Yeah, I mean, I am very blessed to have just be very rich in the context of relationships. And that hasn't always been the case. When I made mention of my last business, I built it not at the expense of relationships, like burning relationships, but I never focused on them because I was always focused being in the business. Yeah. And my wife and I got married in September of 2012. And I had two people show up to my bachelor party. I had my brother and my brother-in-law. I knew absolutely nobody. And we got married on a small island in the Bahamas. And I mean, the amount of people there I could count on, 3 hands. But yeah, so I think that being an entrepreneur is just, it's a very isolating career path. Sure. Like oftentimes you're wearing different masks because you are the beacon of certainty for your family oftentimes, because oftentimes you're the financial provider. You're the beacon of certainty for your team because you're like the leader, as the ground is like shifting below your feet, as you don't know if you're going to be able to make payroll and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So for me, I just started doing dinners for entrepreneurs with a core focus of, and it wasn't about me on the outside. It was actually, I would do it and be like, hey, you guys were all featured in this magazine. I'm doing a dinner for everybody that's featured in this magazine and that kind of stuff. And then I would just be a fly on the wall of those conversations. And I remember the first dinner I did vividly in Toronto. I was so scared in advance of that dinner. I almost canceled 2 hours prior because I'm like, nobody's going to see value in this. They're going to think I completely wasted their time. But it was only 2 hours to showtime, I knew I couldn't cancel. And that dinner, I mean, conversation didn't skip a beat for 4.5 hours. And I just got clarity that being in proximity of these type of people is something I want to do to some capacity for the rest of my life, and not as a business, because I wasn't monetizing these dinners. Right. Actually, the one part of the story that a lot of people don't know is when I realized I was kind of out of alignment with the work that I was doing, I started to kind of sabotage that success. So I went from like a high 7-figure business to, when the dust settled, and there was a couple of things that were beyond my control that contributed to it, but ultimately $250,000 in cash debt. Mm-hmm. And when I was doing these dinners, I didn't know how I was going to pay rent. But whatever little credit I had left on my credit cards, I'm like, they can take my car, they can take whatever assets I have left, but they can't take my relationships. So investing in myself and investing in my relationships, to me, were the safest investments I could make. And yeah, I mean, then I had an opportunity, as you made mention, to do an event with Tim Ferriss, and saw it as a chance for me to do what I do in the dinners, but on a larger scale, and something to keep me busy for the next like 6 months, because I was spiraling into a very, very dark place. And I often say ignorance, confidence, and hard work can go a long way when you're an entrepreneur. And we did our first MMT in Toronto, as you know, and it was special. It was much closer to a wedding than it was a conference, and that's because I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. And because that first event went well, we decided to do a second, and we'll be doing our 12th one in Del Mar in February.
And that really sets the stage for like what you're doing now. And I guess the question that I think a lot of people will have then, and again, I don't want this to sound strategic or tactical from that perspective.
Yeah.
Everyone would dream when they have a business of like getting people they've always wanted to be together in a room. Uh, the question is, and especially in today's day and age, like you kind of set the ground way back when no one was doing this, built the relationships. Now, yeah, how long is the wait list for MMT right now? Like, how many people are on the damn I want to get into MMT but I can't list?
Yeah, it's a messy list. I mean, the thing is, we've had over 20,000 entrepreneurs apply for MMT,
Yeah,
which is a great, sexy number to throw around, but finding the
sure.
right people is rather challenging. So, and that is the one thing every year we kind of raise the bar and that threshold.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're very blessed in the domain, in the demand side of things for sure.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk about that again, less as a strategy, but again, you've built this beautiful thing. It's a collection of human beings that come together, and the evidence, like the proof is in the pudding, as they say. When you look at the relationships that gone beyond MMT now, and businesses that have been created, and successes that have been hit, and again, you look at my story of where I live and who I live with and who my best friends are. That's all a product of MMT. Did you go into it with any sort of a plan, like a growth plan, and say, hey, I'd love to get these many people. This is how I'm going to do it. Or like, what was really the secret to bringing together? Because obviously the first few, you'd say, I'd love to get all these amazing people. But why the hell would they come? Right? That's a general question why anyone would ask. Now there's pent up demand. And I love to discuss if you were intentional about how you created demand, because I think demand generation is a very interesting thing in anybody's business. But can you speak to the first, how did you pull off getting those people in the room? And then now, are you intentional over the last, 12 years, decade of how to create demand and how to ensure that the highest level people are there and how those highest level people are begging to come and you don't have to ask anyone to necessarily be there all the time. Like you've created this beautiful thing. How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things there. I mean, for me, because I had built a business prior to this, where I realized I was out of alignment and built up almost like resentment as far as like, I mean, people would call credit card in hand to like buy stuff from us, and I'd stop answering the phone because I'm like, I know they want to buy, but then that means I'm going to have to deal with them, and I don't want to deal with them. So I start to sabotage, the business from that perspective.
Yeah,
And for me, I was very clear that no matter what I did after that business, that I wanted to be very selective as far as who I served.
got it.
And when it came to MMT, I saw it as almost like how I was doing a dinner. It wasn't designed to be a business. For me, selfishly, I felt like if I could break even and have 100 amazing entrepreneurs there, I just added 100 amazing people to my peer group. And that to me was like the win.
Got it.
And I was struggling early on to figure out how are we going to kind of decide who gets to come, because I belonged to other organizations before, like EO or YPO, and they're criteria-based organizations. Your business has to be in a specific industry or a certain size, and as long as you meet that threshold, you're in.
Right.
But, and I think you and I, we've been in this space long enough. There's a lot of people with very successful businesses that you would not want to trade spaces with. So exactly. So for me, when I had an interaction with somebody we were considering for MMT, I'd ask myself at the end of that interaction, would I want to have dinner with this person? And if the answer was no, I didn't care how successful they were on paper. I'd refund their money in some cases because I came up with a curation process after I already extended some invitations. But I had a mentor at the time, and getting back to like hard decisions, I had a mentor at the time. I refunded $48,000 in like paid tickets. And this is me being $250,000 in debt. Once I did the Tim Ferriss thing, I was $334,000 in debt before I sold a single ticket.
Jesus.
And I had a mentor who's like, you're crazy for, being that selective. Like people are giving you money, just like let them in. And I didn't know. I mean, at the time, I didn't know if that level of curation would pay off, but it has created something incredibly special, and it makes MMT different than anybody else kind of in the marketplace. And that also is what I think didn't draw speakers that first year, but has really catapulted the type of people we've been able to pull in since. Because that first event, I didn't have money. And speakers charge very, very big fees. So what I did was I stole a page from Peter Diamandis' X Prize model, where I did a $25,000 prize for the best talk as voted by the audience. And there's a philosophy in real estate of an anchor tenant. So let's say you have a mall or a plaza and it's not doing great. You know, if you get like a Nordstrom's or an Apple store or whatever the case may be, it's going to bring others. And I try to leverage that by having Tim Ferriss as that anchor. I knew if I had Tim, I could get people who are already connected with Tim, but they're never at the same place at the same time. So the event could be a catalyst to reconnect him and all of his friends. Or I could get people who want to be connected to Tim to speak. And that's ultimately what happened. We had 15 speakers for that first event. Folks like Ryan Holiday, Lewis Howes, Esther Perel, Tim, and a handful of others. And because of the curation and the quality of people in the room, because Tim was there with all of his friends, everybody stayed in the room together for all 2 days. Speakers then come from behind a set of curtains, do their talk, and then leave, which is what you normally would expect. So created this really interesting environment. So much so that when we did the event in year 2, out of the 15 speakers, 10 of them came back as paid attendees the following year. And many of them are still in the community to this day, or a handful of them are still in the community. It says day we're going on, 11, 12 years now. So that is at a high level how we were able to like entice the speakers with no money and no brand. And then, the curation has just been critical to our success over the years.
Well, when people hear a story like that, they're like, oh, Jason's just really smart. He got some great people, built some great relationships, leveraged them, and so on and so. And it was all cotton candy and unicorns, and everything was perfect the whole time. I've learned, unfortunately, the hard way. And again, I'm not the best with relationships. I'm working on that personally. And when I say not the best with them, again, I don't know. I've got a story I got to work on internally to reach out more to people I love and stay connected that way. I know personally that you've had some difficult relationships. I don't even want to go as far to say like people you've regretted letting into the community or who have ended up being a friend, but then things went different ways or whatever.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that if we're going down this path of just relational business, right? Not having a business based on relationships per se, but like just being relational in all of our business endeavors. We hear stories of partnerships that get destroyed, or mentorships and students who crack the code, never talk again, or whatever. In all of your experiences learning, curating, bringing amazing people together, what's the dark side of it? What's the dark side of relationships that people just have to watch out for, be sure of? I'm sure, I don't want to make any conclusions, but there could have been times where your heart might have been broken through people who said something, did another, whatever it be. What do we not know about when it comes to the relational side of things?
Yeah, Simon Sinek has a saying, which I love, which is 100% of your clients are people, 100% of your team are people, 100% of investors are people. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business.
Right.
So that, I think, there needs to be a level of like relationship intelligence to really thrive in business. I mean, to me, I've been exploring this a lot lately, that, I mean, I draw more value. I've drawn little to no value as far as books in the marketplace that are about networking and those kind of things. I've drawn more value understanding how to navigate relationships through theories around investing and looking at things through a long-term lens and the power of compounding. I've learned a lot about relationships through just personal development and that work, because it's hard to be, everybody wants good friends, but they don't want to necessarily be a good friend themselves. Yeah, so that takes work in order to kind of bring that into your life. And then, intimate relationship work. I mean, nothing has held my feet to the fire more than my lovely relationship with my wife over the last 14 years. So all that to say, relationships are just the foundation of everything I do. And the relationship I have with MMT is a unique one where I often say, like, because of that curation process, we spend 95% of our social time with the people in the community. Like, we were just in Portugal for Christmas and met up with 3 of our closest friends. They all came in through MMT. I mean, just like, that's very much the way things have happened. Yeah. And I always say, like, if we have 150 people at MMT, if we got married again, we'd have 145 of those people to our wedding. In fact, at our event in 2022, I re-proposed to my wife in front of everybody because I was like, everybody's here. Why not? So the dark side of that is There's a couple. One, the keeping the container that the community, like the container that is the community clean
Yep.
is paramount. So when there's conflict in the community, you made mention that there's 4 mentors I've had in my life. All 4 have been a part of MMT. All 4 have had to kick out of MMT for various different reasons.
Wow.
So
I didn't know that.
as somebody who is like a people pleaser and hates conflict and all that kind of stuff, that is incredibly, it's been a journey. It's been quite a journey. But to me, whenever there's, a situation like that within MMT, I'm wearing 3 hats. There's like the entrepreneur hat of like, oh, if I kick this person out, it's gonna hurt us financially. It's gonna cost us 20 grand, 25 grand, whatever the case may be.
Yep.
If you spread it out over the lifetime value, it's gonna be, cost a fortune. Then there's the friend hat of like, I have a relationship with these people, and I know if I kick somebody out, that relationship will be no more, or it'll be, damaged to say the least. And then there's like I own the container of the community, and I have to keep that as clean as possible. And that is the hat I always have to, put in the ring first.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've definitely have, I'm not a lot of relationships, but I definitely have had to turn people away, or remove people from the community, or all that kind of stuff, because the integrity of the container matters so much. I can't expose the community to somebody who's potentially a liability. And again, those are the hard decisions behind the scenes that people don't see. But that is what gives you longevity in this space, because you can play fast and loose a couple times, but I mean, you're not going to be around for 11 years, 12 years. And in my case, I want to be able to do this for ideally as much of my life as I can. So those are the hard decisions you have to make behind the scenes.
On the other side of it, you've been doing this now for 12 seasons, let's call it.
Sure.
When you came on the scene with MMT1, and I was a volunteer in MMT2, I think. I saw it. MMT's evolved since then, obviously. But you built something that I feel like the industry didn't see before. It was just done very differently and awesome. And what's that score? And NPS score, is that what it's called? People, I mean, the scores were through the roof. And I know the personality you are also is, when you plan for the next one, the thought is, I gotta make it better. Like, you can't
For sure
stay the status quo. You're bloody 12 seasons into this thing. Like, how does one make what could be considered best in class better every time? And does it need to be better? And I'm not speaking about MMT specifically, but the lessons that can be learned on the other side, the listener side, of saying like, I've got something great. Do I leave it as is? Do I make it better? If I do make it, how do I make it better? Because like you set the bar, and particularly because we were talking about this earlier, the sense of the artist is also in you. In the sense of almost a perfectionist, not quite, but like, how do I give my best work every single time? What are the lessons to be learned about, quote unquote, one-upping what you did, which was so great before, to try to make it even better? Because one way to do it in the event space is, oh, well, just cycle through new people, right? It's like the speaker that has one keynote talk. He doesn't have to come up with other talk. He just goes around and gives the same talk everywhere. And, oh, that's easy. It's different. And I allude to this example because I used to be a pastor. So 14 years as a pastor, I couldn't give the same damn talk every Sunday, 52 weeks out of the year times 14 years. I had to come up with something the next day, the next week, and the next week, and the next week. What is your mindset around that? How does one make what is great even better without crushing your soul in the process and trying to figure it all out?
Yeah. Jerry Seinfeld has a saying of, find work that the torture you can bear. And I had, oddly enough, I had a conversation with my daughter. We went out for a date night last night, and she asked me, she's like, our next event is in 46 days. And we talk about MMT all the time in our household, because Candace is my business partner, and she's doing her thing, I'm doing my thing, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And Ava asked me, are you worried about this next event? I said, I'm terrified.
Wow.
I'm absolutely terrified. but that's to be expected. I've done this enough now that like know that being terrified is
Part of the
part of it.
process. Yeah.
And for me, I should be worried if I'm not terrified. I mean, that's the one beautiful thing and potential drawback one could say of like when you serve people who are friends, who you respect immensely. I value their time. There's a huge commitment for people to come to MMT. These are busy individuals. These are not, they have families, they have big businesses, they have a lot of responsibilities and all that kind of stuff. So for them to carve out 4 or 5, sometimes a week out of their calendar because they'll add a couple of days on the front end or the back end. I mean, that's just a huge responsibility.
Right.
And that is one of the reasons why people come, because they know we take it incredibly seriously. And every event, we've designed it in a way that like we are forced to redesign the event from scratch every year. Because
Right.
what most people will do is they'll use the same property every year and they will use the same format every year.
Right.
And it's very cookie cutter in nature, which is the best model you could imagine to create a scalable, profitable, business in the event space. We, on the other hand, choose to make things difficult, and we change we change a property every year. That takes my poor wife has spent so much time trying to lock down a property for 2026. But the thing is, what comes from that, it forces us to look at that event as a blank slate.
Right.
And then forces us to innovate. How I design an event now is very different how I would have designed an event 2 years ago. And I do know I'm probably inherently lazy, that if I use the same venue and those kind of things, which again would be a huge weight off my shoulder, there would not be that force function to innovate. And it's funny, I again, knowing who I'm serving and the amount of pressure that puts on me. I have a friend, actually, we have a mutual friend that used to do an event. He did it for a decade. And this was probably their 7th or 8th event. And I emailed them and I said, oh, we were just chatting back and forth and I was going to be in town. And he's like, this was maybe a week or 2 before his event. And he's like, do you want to do lunch? And I was like, dude, are you sure? Like, you're 2 weeks out. Like, are you sure you have the time to do lunch? He's like, absolutely. And when I was sitting down with him at lunch, he's like, yeah, everything's been like done or what have you. Like, we got our speakers and all this kind of stuff. Like, there's nothing else to do. And I was like, man, I can't wait one day that I can get where I'm not like a nervous wreck all the way up until the minute I step on stage.
Right.
And over the last couple of years, I've had to come to that realization that's never going to be the case for me. I'm always going to continue to refine and tinker and those kind of things because there's a lot at stake. So I mean, that's how we approach it.
I love it. Before we kind of wrap up, there's 2 things that I wrote down that I want to make sure we just touch upon. And one is this, you mentioned how you live on a farm, a 57-acre farm. I didn't realize it was that big, and you got cows and bulls and animals and all sorts of stuff. And you hold harvest dinners on them. So first, how the heck did you get into the whole I'm going to own and I'm assuming it's a hobby farm, obviously, unless you're selling a ton of stuff from it. But I mean, how did you get into that? Like, what is that in the bigger scheme of Jayson Gaignard? And then just some thoughts around the harvest dinners, because I think they're cool, and it almost kind of takes you back to your roots of how the whole thing started, like what's going on there and why do you do them, and then what are the lessons that can be learned from outside people who may or may not host dinners, but the idea behind why you host them.
Yeah, so the idea of the farm, so we moved out to a place called Kitchener-Waterloo, which is where my wife is from, and we want to be closer to our family, and we were renting for many, many years. And it came up that we had to find a new lease on somewhere. And I stumbled across a listing for a house that was ultimately a farm on 30 acres. And I told my wife, I'm like, this could either work out really, really well or really, really poorly, because that summer I had received a citation from the city for not cutting my little patch of grass in front of our house. So I'm like, to be on 30 acres, this could be problematic, but let's give it a shot. And for context, I grew up in like condos and that kind of stuff in a major metropolitan city. So knew nothing about like having a large space. It didn't take long for us to get there and just for me to realize that like I absolutely adored it. I bought a little like ride-on tractor. And I would drive this silly thing, and it allowed me to kind of like disconnect. And I come from a long lineage of physical laborers. My father did like construction. His father was a lumberjack, like that was actually going to be my path. I was a mechanic and I thought I'd be working with my hands. So
Right.
there is this element of like that I was lacking of like being in nature, working with my hands
Interesting.
and those kind of things. So we rented that house for many, many years. And then I was looking probably for about 4 or 5 years for a farm. One finally came up for sale, but I was in Vegas with my daughter for a daddy-daughter trip. And it was it was on my birthday that this farm came up for sale, but it checked a lot of the boxes. And I reached out to the real estate agent. I said, would you keep me posted if there's any movement on this? And by Monday, he said they had received 5 offers.
Oh my
So I
goodness.
made an offer sight unseen,
Wow.
and we ended up getting it. My wife
No.
didn't know because she was in Ireland at the time on a retreat, completely disconnected. So I picked her up from the airport and she's like, why do you have a smile on your face? I'm like, well, I got to break something to you. So ultimately we bought this in 2019 and have just
Oh my God.
invested a tremendous amount of blood, sweat, and tears into it. And it's been just nothing but amazing. And it's for me, the contrast of the work that I do is very social in nature, but able to be actually to like retreat into nature
Yeah.
and like have animals and all that kind of stuff has been amazing. And yeah, we don't sell anything on the farm when it comes to food, but everything we produce, we have 1,400 feet of garden beds. We have like, I don't know, 16 dozen eggs in the fridge right now that we're donating to the local food bank. So everything that we
Wow.
produce gets
Yeah.
donated. So we don't do
Yeah.
farmers markets or any of that kind of stuff.
Wow.
But the dinners, my wife and I have on and off fantasized about owning a restaurant. Because to me, one of the realizations I made many years ago is I love nourishing people, whether that's like cooking and nourishing them that way, or in the context of relationships and bringing people
Yeah.
together and nourishing them socially. So we've thought about doing dinners for many, many years, or we want to open a restaurant. And I was like, listen, we'll both go broke in no time opening a restaurant. How can we do something that gives us like the
Cool.
feel of that without
Cool.
all the risk? And the idea was to do these dinners. So we did 2 last year. Yeah, it would be last year now. For 30 people each dinner. They were $400 a head. We sold out both of them. It was oddly
Wow.
enough, 98% of the people were all from MMT and they flew in from as far as Thailand to come for these silly dinners.
Amazing.
And it was magical. So we'll do another 2 again, kind of this year. And yeah, it's been amazing.
Amazing. Let's end. I know it's a ways out, but you brought up a few times the book, and the
Yeah,
book being a culmination of everything you learned that we
yeah,
try to summarize a little bit of here.
yeah.
Um, what is the book going to be about? I know, but for the listener, what is it going to be about? And then maybe can you pull the greatest lesson that comes top of mind right now we're sharing from it? And then while we're on it, just like where can people stay tuned to what you're doing there? And that, usually when I have a guest on the podcast, they're selling something to everybody.
Yeah.
You're not. Like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can't buy anything from Jayson Gaignard. You can maybe get on a wait list of MMT, but if you haven't been invited and or endorsed by someone else, you ain't going. So, but I think this project you're working on is for the masses. It's for anyone and everyone who wants to learn about the lessons you learned throughout your life and your process. So, what's the book about? What's the greatest lesson that comes to top of mind from it? And then how can someone maybe follow you on your journey until the day that it is ready to be released?
Yeah, I think that the easiest or the best way to give an idea is at MMT in Carmel in 2017, I brought somebody to speak named Zach Anner. And the reason I brought Zach to speak and open the event is so many of us are incredible at building these amazing peer groups, but we have a hard time asking for help.
Yes. Right.
And Zach Anner is a comedian, but he has cerebral palsy. And he can't navigate the world without asking for help. So I thought he would be a great example for all of us. And he was amazing.
Yeah. It was awesome.
At the end of his talk, he shared a one line, which I have taken with his permission, which he just brilliantly shared. I'm not self-made, I'm community made. And this notion of being self-made is this gospel in the entrepreneurial space. You see it on Forbes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And we both know this. Nobody is self-made. So the spirit of the book is very much around that. It's how to find your people, how to
Yeah.
nurture those relationships, which I know you brought voice in this conversation. It's a bit of a challenge for you. And ultimately, relationships are a practice. So what does
Right.
that practice look like? Especially for people who have, very little time, so they need those things for leverage, and then also how to ask for help, because that is a challenge for so many of us. So that is really kind of the through line of the book, and yeah, I hopefully end of 2025, early 2026 is when it'll come out. And if you want to follow along, just you can find me on LinkedIn or on Instagram or what have you. I'll be sure to keep everybody posted for sure.
I love that. I always end with the same question, but before I do, I like to throw, and this is only actually for my own personal preference, but I think other people
Yeah.
get benefit from it. What's the best purchase you made in the last 12 months?
It's so funny. I wrote this question down to ask at MMT.
Oh, really?
As a,
Because
like
I love hearing it, because it ends up being stuff that I like. I'm like, oh, that's something to add to my list there. It doesn't matter, expensive or inexpensive. I mean,
honestly, what's coming to mind right now is access and coaching. What I mean by that is I was actually sitting next to Ben Hardy at a mastermind a month ago, and he wrote a book with Dan Sullivan called Who Not How, which is a brilliant just frame to navigate the world. And there was a gentleman at in the group. He was talking about how over the last year he's invested a ton of his time focused on understanding AI and content creation and all this kind of stuff. And he was talking about this Facebook group with 300,000 entrepreneurs, all fascinated with AI. And I was like, I don't have time to understand AI. Who runs that group? And he's like, oh, it's this guy. His name's Jonathan Mast. And I almost don't want to put him on blast because I ended up looking him up online. You could do a 20-minute call with him for like dirt cheap. And I was like, well, I'll just go to him. I'll go to the source instead of like trying to figure out AI. And I've been working with him in a coaching capacity, and it's been amazing. Or storytelling is a big area of focus for me right now. And I'm being coached again. It's crazy how cheap it's been. I'm being coached by one of the most decorated storytellers of like all time right now. So like that is what I plan to lean into even more in the coming year is buying access to those minds. And instead of me reading books and trying to learn things and implement, I'll just go right to the source and be like, hey, here's my problem. How can I implement this? It's that's the best investment.
Yeah, such a great hack that I think people don't realize and are probably astonished when they actually realize how quote unquote inexpensive in relation to value that you get.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I guess there's nowhere to point people to in terms of website or anything on what I just follow you on social.
Yeah. Jayson Gaignard on all the socials.
On all the socials. Okay, last question then. We're gonna pretend that we're at some sort of a lifetime banquet award show type thing. Think Emmys or Oscars or Grammys or whatever. And you're the guest of honor. You're being presented with a lifetime achievement award for everything you've done up until this point. The question is, and what I want to know is who do you thank and why? Colleagues, friends, mentors, business partners, wives, obviously. But who would you recognize that got you to this point in life and why? Who would you thank?
Dude, it's funny because it's top of mind. Well, that's the problem. It's too long of a list. And I'm thinking about this through the lens of the acknowledgement section of my book. Because I'm like, if I start naming people, there's no way I can name everybody. And then people will be like, oh, I'm not included. Exactly. So for me, I'm like, I was thinking of just having like a very catch-all acknowledgement of like, you know who you are. So yeah, I mean, it's honestly, I think the what comes up for me again, there's endless people. But I think, and it's just because it was top of mind yesterday or 2 days ago, that Tony Robbins and his work was an inflection point for me when I was 18. Wow. And to me, like I was on a certain path, and when I came across his like UPW event, it just changed my trajectory by 2 or 3 degrees. And that as a result, then I joined, let's say, a mastermind or made a connection with a mentor. Actually, it was a mentor that I had after that. That changed another 2 or 3 degrees. And then I joined something and went to an event, and the next thing you know, it's a completely different kind of trajectory. So if I were to like nail down like what was the first inflection point in my career, it was really stumbling across Tony Robbins and his work.
Wow. Super powerful. Well, time has come to bring conversation Tuning in. We've been talking to Jayson Gaignard, everybody, founder of Mastermind Talks. Remember, there's only so many hours in a day. So let's think about how we can stop wasting them and focusing on what matters most. And that is the bottom line. Jayson, thank you for your time today.
I appreciate you, my man.
Thanks for listening to the Bottom Line Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.